Marcus Hale had given Rome 25 years of his life. 25 winters sleeping on frozen ground. 25 summers marching beneath a burning sky. 25 years watching younger men fall before they ever had the chance to grow old. And now, for the first time in decades, the orders had stopped. No trumpet, no formation, no next march, just silence. Marcus stood there holding the same armor that had kept him alive all those years and realized something unsettling. Rome had no plan for him anymore. No clear future. No guarantee of safety. After everything he had survived, this might be the most dangerous moment of his life. Because in Rome, a soldier without a purpose was not just forgotten. He was a problem waiting to happen. So what really happened to Roman soldiers when they became too old to fight? And why did some of them walk away with land and power while others quietly disappeared? Marcus had joined the army at 18. Long before the lines on his face and the stiffness in his knees began to tell their story. Back then, Rome offered something simple. Serve long enough, obey every command, survive what most men could not, and one day you would be rewarded. That promise carried him through years that blurred together. Endless marching, building camps in the dark, waking before dawn, and standing shoulder to shoulder with men who became closer than family. The army shaped everything about him. It taught him how to endure, how to react without hesitation, and how to live in a world where weakness had consequences. Over time, the idea of life outside the army became distant, almost unreal. The routines replaced his old identity, and the empire became the only constant he could rely on. But time does something to every soldier. It slows the step, dulls the edge, and leaves behind a body that remembers every mile. By the time Marcus reached his 40s, he was still strong, but no longer the fastest. The younger recruits moved with a speed he could not match, and he could feel the difference in every drill, every march, every moment he had to push just a little harder to keep up. Still, he stayed, because leaving was never an option until Rome said it was. Retirement was not a personal choice. It was a decision made by the system he had served for decades. When that moment finally came, it did not arrive with celebration. There was no grand farewell, no moment that felt equal to what he had given. Instead, it came as a simple announcement. His service was complete, his name removed from the rolls, his place in the formation filled by someone younger. Just like that, Marcus was no longer a soldier. And yet, nothing in his mind or body felt different. The habits remained. The instincts remained. Only the structure was gone. What Marcus expected next was something he had held on to for years. Rome's promise. The reward that justified everything. Soldiers like him were supposed to receive what was called an honorable discharge, a recognition that they had fulfilled their duty. And with it came the expectation of payment or land, something that would allow them to start again. Under emperors like Augustus, systems had been put in place to make this possible. A military treasury existed to ensure that veterans received what they had earned. On paper, it was a fair exchange. Years of service in return for stability. But the reality was rarely that simple. Marcus stood among other veterans waiting for their futures to be decided. Some were handed documents assigning them land in distant provinces. Others received payments, though not always as much as they had expected. And then there were those who were told to wait, that their reward would come later. Marcus was one of them. Days passed, then weeks. The certainty he had carried for 25 years began to weaken. Because for the first time, he was no longer protected by the structure of the army. He was exposed to the same uncertainty that affected every other citizen of the empire. Eventually, Marcus received his answer. Not money, but land. A plot in a distant province far from anything he had ever known. It was not a choice. It was an assignment. Rome had decided where he would go, just as it had decided where he would fight. So once again, Marcus packed what little he had and began another journey. Not as a soldier this time, but as something new, a veteran settler. The idea behind these settlements was simple. Rome placed experienced soldiers in newly controlled regions to stabilize them. These men knew how to defend themselves. They understood discipline, and their presence alone could discourage unrest. In this way, even in retirement, Marcus was still serving the empire. The battlefield had changed, but the purpose remained. At first, the land felt like an opportunity, a chance to build something of his own. A home, a life that did not depend on orders. But the reality was harder than he expected. The soil was unfamiliar. The people around him were strangers, some of whom remembered very clearly that men like Marcus had once arrived in armor. There was tension, even if it was never spoken openly. And for Marcus, the quiet was its own kind of challenge. No commands, no clear structure, just decisions he had to make on his own. Some veterans adapted. They became farmers, merchants, respected figures in their communities. Their years of discipline translated into stability. But others struggled. The transition from soldier to civilian was not always smooth. The habits that kept them alive in war did not always fit in a peaceful setting. And the absence of constant purpose left a gap that was difficult to fill. Marcus found himself somewhere in between. He worked the land, learned slowly, and built a life piece by piece. But there were moments when the past felt closer than the present. The sound of footsteps at night. The instinct to stay alert even when there was no threat. The sense that something was missing, even when everything seemed in place. What made veterans like Marcus even more significant was something Rome understood very well. Their loyalty did not disappear when their service ended. These men had spent decades following orders, trusting commanders, and believing in the system. That loyalty could be powerful, but it could also become dangerous if it was broken. Because a group of trained, experienced men who felt abandoned could quickly become a problem. This is why Roman emperors paid close attention to how veterans were treated. Rewards were not just about fairness. They were about control. A satisfied veteran was less likely to cause trouble, but a mistreated one could influence others. There were moments in Roman history when veterans supported uprisings, aligning themselves with leaders who promised better treatment. Their experience made them valuable, and their dissatisfaction made them unpredictable. Marcus began to understand this as he settled into his new life. He was no longer part of the army, but he was still part of something larger. His presence, his experience, even his past service all had meaning beyond his own life. And that realization changed the way he saw his future. In time, the land became more familiar. The routines of farming replaced the routines of the camp. The silence no longer felt as heavy. Marcus built connections, slowly, carefully. He was no longer the young recruit who had left home years ago, but he was also not just a former soldier. He was something in between, shaped by both worlds. And yet, even as he adapted, one truth remained. Rome had not truly let him go, because if the empire needed him again, if a crisis demanded experienced men, there was always the possibility that he could be called back. Some veterans returned to service in times of need, drawn by loyalty, necessity, or the simple fact that they knew no other life. The army never fully released them. It stayed with them, in memory, in instinct, in identity. For Marcus, the years that followed were quieter, but never simple. He had survived the battles that defined his youth. He had endured the uncertainty that came after, and he had found a way to move forward, even when the path was unclear. His story was not unique. It was shared by thousands of men across the empire, each with their own version of the same journey. So what happened to Roman soldiers when they became too old to fight? Some were rewarded with land or money. Some struggled to adapt. Some found new purpose. And some never truly left the life they had known. Rome did not simply retire its soldiers. It reshaped them, placed them where they were still useful, and relied on them in ways that extended far beyond the battlefield. And in the end, that may be the most revealing part of all. Because for Rome, a soldier was never just a man who fought. He was a resource, a tool, a piece of a larger system that continued to function long after his time in the ranks was over. Marcus Hale had given the empire everything it asked of him, and in return, Rome gave him just enough to begin again. The question is, would that have been enough for you?